one giant canal, one dry belt across Africa, and one question that could change the future of the Sahel. What if Ibrahim Traoré tried to build a massive water corridor into Burkina Faso's drylands? Not a small irrigation ditch, not a campaign slogan, but a canal system large enough to move water toward farms, villages, reservoirs, and future food processing zones across the Sahel. Supporters would call it a revolution. Critics would call it impossible. And both sides would be forced to ask the same question. Where would the water come from? Because digging the canal is not the hardest part. The hardest part is making water survive the journey. America reshaped deserts with dams, aqueducts, and irrigation, but still faces water stress. Europe built canals and water systems that help cities and farms grow, but even rich systems struggle with drought and maintenance. So the Sahel would be a harder test. This video is not claiming the canal already exists. It asks a bigger question. Could a giant water corridor turn Burkina Faso's drylands into food power? Or create a new crisis in the heart of the Sahel? Before any giant canal can be imagined, the first reality is the land itself. The Sahel is not dry in only one simple way. It is dry through uncertainty. Some seasons bring rain. Some seasons bring too little. Some places receive water too late. Some receive it all at once so fast that it runs across the ground instead of sinking into the soil. For farmers, that uncertainty becomes a daily risk. A family can prepare the field, plant the seed, wait for the sky, and still lose the season because the rain arrives late, stops early, or disappears when the crop needs it most. This is the real water problem. Not only the absence of water, the absence of dependable water, because agriculture cannot build confidence on hope alone. A farmer needs timing. A village needs wells. A herd needs grazing routes and drinking points. A market needs crops that arrive regularly. A food processing plant needs raw material every month, not only when the rainy season is kind. That is why a giant water corridor sounds so powerful. It promises stability in a region where instability often begins with the sky. But the dream also exposes the weakness. A country can buy tractors. It can build roads. It can open processing plants. It can talk about food sovereignty. But tractors cannot plow a dead field forever. Roads cannot carry harvests that never grow. Factories cannot process crops that never arrive. And food sovereignty cannot survive if water remains a seasonal gamble. This is where the comparison with America and Europe becomes useful. In the United States, irrigation systems, reservoirs, dams, and aqueducts help turn dry regions into agricultural powerhouses. But even there, water stress, drought, overuse, and political conflict continue to test the system. In Europe, water management canals, rivers, reservoirs, and regulation help support cities, farms, and industry. But droughts and climate pressure are forcing even wealthy countries to rethink how water is stored, shared, and protected. So Burkina Faso would face a harder version of a global problem. Less capital, hotter conditions, greater evaporation, more pressure on rural communities, and a much smaller margin for mistakes. That is why the canal idea cannot begin with the canal. It must begin with the water problem. If the problem is only drought, people imagine one big solution. But if the problem is timing, storage evaporation, soil energy governance, and access, then the solution must become a system. And that is where the dream becomes serious. Because a canal is not just a line of water. It is a promise that the dry season does not get the final word. The dream begins with a simple image. A blue line cutting through dry land. Water moving where dust used to dominate. Farms spreading along the canal. Villages storing water through the dry season. Reservoirs feeding irrigation zones. Food processing plants rising near fields that no longer depend only on the sky. That is why the idea of a giant Sahel canal feels so powerful. It does not look like a normal infrastructure project. It looks like a different future. But a real canal is not just a trench filled with water. It is a corridor. It needs a source. It needs a route. It needs pumping stations. It needs reservoirs. It needs gates, canals, smaller channels, drainage systems, and monitoring teams. It needs engineers who understand soil slope, evaporation sediment, flood risk, and maintenance. It needs security along the route. It needs farmers trained to use water without destroying the land. And it needs a national plan that decides who receives water first, who pays for it, and who protects it when scarcity returns. That is why a canal dream can become dangerous if it is treated only as a symbol. A canal is not powerful because it appears on a map. It is powerful only if it becomes a working water system. For Burkina Faso, the idea would carry enormous emotional force. Supporters would see it as the ultimate sign of self-reliance. Not waiting for rain, not waiting for food imports, not waiting for outside rescue, but using engineering to push back against drought, hunger, rural poverty, and the slow pressure of desertification. The footage would be unforgettable. Excavators opening the land, concrete channels stretching into the distance, solar farms powering pumps, water entering reservoirs, farmers watching dry fields turn green. But behind that beautiful image is a brutal truth. The canal would have to fight gravity. It would have to fight evaporation. It would have to fight silt. It would have to fight heat. It would have to fight politics. And it would have to fight time, because every canal is easier to announce than to maintain. This is where America and Europe offer a warning. Their canals, aqueducts, dams, and irrigation systems were not just built once. They were maintained for decades, expanded, repaired, regulated, fought over, and constantly financed. So if Traore ever tried to build a giant water corridor into the Sahel, the real question would not be whether the dream is big enough. The real question would be whether the system behind the dream is strong enough. And that leads to the first impossible question. Where would the water come from? The first impossible question is not about digging. It is about water. Because a giant canal can only move what already exists somewhere else. And for Burkina Faso, that question is brutal. The country is landlocked. It does not have an ocean coast where desalinated water can simply be pumped inland without crossing other countries. It does not have unlimited rivers waiting to be redirected without consequence. It does not have rainfall that arrives with the reliability of a machine. So before anyone can imagine a blue corridor through the Sahel, the map must answer one question. Where does the water come from? One possibility would be existing rivers and river basins. But rivers are not magic pipes. They have seasons. They have upstream users. They have downstream communities. They support farms, fishing ecosystems, livestock, and cities. Taking too much water from one place can create scarcity somewhere else. Another possibility would be reservoirs. Store water when rain arrives. Release it when fields need it. That sounds simple, but reservoirs need catchment areas. They need dams. They need maintenance. They lose water to evaporation. They collect silt. They can flood land. And if the rainy season fails, the reservoir becomes a monument to a promise the sky did not keep. A third possibility would be groundwater. Wells, boreholes, underground reserves, and solar-powered pumps could support local irrigation. But groundwater is not infinite. If it is pumped faster than it recharges, the future is being borrowed from below the ground. A fourth possibility would be regional cooperation. A true Sahel water corridor might require agreements with neighboring countries, shared rivers, shared infrastructure, and shared rules. But that turns engineering into diplomacy. Who pays? Who controls the gates? Who receives water first during drought? What happens when one country needs more and another country says no? This is where the canal dream becomes larger than Burkina Faso. It becomes a regional political question. A fifth possibility would be desalination from a coastal country, then pumping water inland. That may sound futuristic, but it would be extremely expensive. It would require massive energy pipelines or canals across borders, security along the route, and long-term financing. Even rich countries struggle with the cost and politics of moving water across great distances. So the first truth is clear. The canal is not the first project. The water source is the first project. This is where America and Europe provide a sharp warning. America built aqueducts, dams, reservoirs, and irrigation systems that help cities and farms grow in dry places. But those systems also created water conflicts, depleted rivers, stressed groundwater, and forced hard choices during drought. Europe has older canal networks, regulated rivers, and stronger water institutions in many regions. But even there, heat waves, droughts, and climate pressure are forcing governments to rethink water security. So Burkina Faso cannot simply copy a rich country model. It would have to build a water strategy that fits its land, climate, money, energy, and politics. The reality test starts here. Can enough water be found without stealing from the future? Can it be stored without losing too much to heat? Can it be moved without creating conflict? Can farmers access it fairly? Can the system survive dry years? Because the most dangerous canal is not one that fails to bring water. It is one that brings water for a few years, creates dependence, and then collapses when the source cannot hold. That is why the water question must come before the dream. Because without a reliable source, a giant canal is not a revolution. It is a line on a map. What happens if the canal actually works? This is the part of the dream that makes people stop scrolling. Water enters the drylands. The first reservoirs begin to fill. Small irrigation channels move through farming zones. Fields that once waited helplessly for the rainy season begin to produce with more confidence. Villages that once organized life around scarcity begin to organize life around planning. That would be the emotional power of a Sahel water corridor. Not water as an image, water as stability. For farmers, it could mean planting with less fear. It could mean more than one growing season in areas where conditions allow it. It could mean vegetables, maize, onions, tomatoes, rice, fruit trees, fodder, crops and livestock, water points becoming more reliable. For herders, it could reduce pressure on grazing routes and drinking points. For women and children, it could reduce the burden of walking long distances for water if local systems are designed fairly. For villages, it could mean less pressure to leave during hard seasons. And for the national economy, it could change the logic of development. Because water does not only grow crops, water grows markets. A canal that feeds farms can also feed storage centers. Storage centers can feed processing plants. Processing plants can feed jobs. Jobs can keep young people closer to home. Roads become more valuable when they carry regular harvests. Electricity becomes more valuable when it powers irrigation pumps, cold rooms, mills, and factories. Schools become more useful when young people can train for agriculture, technology, water management equipment, repair, and food processing. This is how one water project could become the center of many systems, but only if it is planned that way. Because water alone does not create food sovereignty. Water without roads still leaves crops trapped. Water without storage still leads to post-harvest losses. Water without energy limits pumping and processing. Water without farmer training can damage soil. Water without fair rules can create conflict between communities. So the dream is not only a green line across the Sahel. The dream is a connected corridor. Canals, reservoirs, solar pumps, farm roads, storage facilities, processing zones, local markets, farmer cooperatives, soil monitoring, drainage systems, and public rules that make water useful without making it dangerous. This is where the image becomes powerful for Burkina Faso. A dry corridor could become a productive corridor. A village that once depended on one uncertain rainy season could begin to produce food more consistently. A processing plant that once struggled to get enough raw material could receive a more predictable supply. A rural road that once felt empty could become part of a food economy. That is why supporters would see the canal as more than engineering. They would see it as food independence. But the reality test remains. Can the water be delivered to the right places? Can small farmers benefit, not only large operators? Can the system prevent waste? Can the land absorb irrigation without turning salty, flooded, or exhausted? And can the country maintain the system after the first excitement fades? Because a canal is not proven when water first arrives. It is proven when farms still produce through the next dry season. And that leads to the deeper question. If water creates possibility, can Burkina Faso turn that possibility into food sovereignty and a Sahel economy? If water creates possibility, the next question is whether Burkina Faso can turn that possibility into food sovereignty. Because food sovereignty is not only about producing more food, it is about controlling more of the system that produces food. Seeds, water, soil, roads, storage, processing, energy, markets, prices, and the ability of farmers to earn enough to keep producing next season. A giant canal would not automatically solve that, but if it worked, it could change the foundation of agriculture in the Sahel. Today, many farmers in dry regions are forced to build their lives around uncertainty. They plant when the sky allows it. They harvest when the season cooperates. They sell when roads, buyers, and prices give them a chance. A water corridor could reduce part of that uncertainty, not eliminate it, reduce it. With more dependable irrigation, farmers could plan more carefully. Cooperatives could organize production zones. Food processing plants could receive more predictable supply. Storage centers could be placed near irrigated corridors. Livestock zones could receive more stable water points. And local markets could begin to grow around production instead of scarcity. This is where the canal dream becomes larger than agriculture. It becomes an economic map, because once water supports regular production, everything around farming becomes more valuable. Roads have more goods to move. Trucks have more reason to operate. Mills have more grain to process. Cold rooms have more vegetables to protect. Factories have more raw material. Schools have more reason to train irrigation technicians, mechanics, food processors, and water managers. And young people have more reasons to stay near productive land instead of leaving only because the land no longer offers a future. This is the lesson America and Europe show clearly. The United States did not become an agricultural power only because it had land. It built irrigation systems, storage networks, highways, rail, machinery, crop research, credit systems, insurance, food companies, and processing chains. Europe protects farming through policy, cooperatives, water management standards, subsidies, and market access. The lesson is not that Burkina Faso should copy either model exactly. The lesson is that water alone is not food sovereignty. A country needs a food system. That means a canal would have to connect with smaller irrigation networks, farmer, training, soil testing seed systems, storage roads, processing, factories, local finance, and fair rules for water distribution. Otherwise, the canal could create a new imbalance. Large farms might capture the best water. Small farmers might remain at the edge. Some communities might benefit while others watch the water pass by. Food production might rise, but profits could still leave the village if processing and storage are controlled elsewhere. That is why the farmer test matters. Does the canal help ordinary producers? Does it help women farmers? Does it help herders in small villages? Does it reduce food imports? Does it increase local processing? Does it make prices more stable for families? And does it build rural wealth, not just impressive footage? Because a green field can look like victory, but the real victory is when that field becomes income, food security processing jobs, and long-term resilience. A canal can bring water, but only a system can turn water into national power. And that brings us to the hidden engine behind any giant canal: energy. A giant canal in the Sahel would look like a water project, but underneath the surface, it would also be an energy project, because water does not move for free. If the source is lower than the farm's pumps must lift it. If the canal crosses long distances, pumping stations may be needed again and again. If reservoirs lose water to evaporation, more water has to be moved to replace what the heat takes away. And if the system depends on electric pumps, then every power outage becomes a water outage. That is the hidden engine of the canal dream. Energy. Without reliable power, the canal becomes fragile. A pumping station can be beautifully built and still become useless if electricity is too weak, too expensive, or too unstable. Solar power would naturally become part of the conversation. Burkina Faso has strong sunlight. Large solar farms could help power pumps, monitoring systems, cold rooms, irrigation controls, and water treatment equipment. In the best version of the dream, solar fields sit near pumping stations. Battery systems protect critical operations. Diesel backup exists only for emergencies. And water movement becomes connected to a wider national energy strategy. But solar is not magic either. The sun does not shine at night. Batteries are expensive. Panels need cleaning, security, replacement, and technical maintenance. Pumps need spare parts. Transformers need protection. And a canal system cannot simply stop whenever energy planning fails. This is where the United States and Europe offer another mirror. America's water systems depend on huge energy networks, from pumping water across mountains to treating and moving water for cities and farms. Europe's water systems also depend on power regulation and constant maintenance, especially as droughts and heat waves increase pressure on rivers and reservoirs. So if rich systems can struggle with energy water stress, a Sahel canal would need even tighter planning. The question is, not only can Burkina Faso build the canal, the question is, can it power the canal every day? Can it afford the electricity? Can it train technicians? Can it protect solar sites, batteries, pumps, and control rooms? Can it keep the system running during heat-dust conflict and budget pressure? Because if the canal becomes dependent on imported fuel, expensive parts, or unstable grids, then the promise of food sovereignty becomes tied to another dependency. That is why the smartest version of the canal would not be a canal alone. It would be a water and energy corridor. Canals carrying water, solar fields powering pumps, local technicians maintaining equipment, cold storage protecting harvests, processing plants using the same energy backbone, and rural communities gaining both water and power from one connected system. A water canal in the Sahel would also be an energy project in disguise. And if that energy system fails, the water dream fails with it. If water and energy become the hidden engines of the canal, security becomes the test nobody can ignore. Because a giant water corridor would not be protected by concrete alone. It would pass through land, through communities, through farming zones, through roads, pumps gates, reservoirs, and control points. Every part of that system would matter. A broken gate could stop water. A damaged pump could dry out an irrigation zone. A blocked route could interrupt maintenance crews. A local dispute could become a national problem if people believe one community is receiving water while another is being left behind. That is why a canal in the Sahel would never be just infrastructure. It would become strategic infrastructure. And strategic infrastructure creates political questions. Who controls the water gates? Who decides when water is released? Who gets priority during drought? Farmers, herders, cities, food processing zones, large farms, small villages. And what happens when the dry season becomes harsh enough that there is not enough water for everyone? These questions cannot be solved by machines. They require rules, trust, local committees, transparent planning, security forces that protect the system without turning water into fear, and regional cooperation if the water source crosses borders or depends on shared basins. This is where the canal dream becomes politically sensitive. In the Sahel, water can reduce conflict if it is shared fairly. But water can also create conflict if people feel excluded from it. A canal could make farming zones more stable. It could reduce pressure on migration. It could support villages that might otherwise lose young people. It could strengthen the state by making public services visible in rural areas. But if the canal is captured by elites, guarded without accountability, or designed around political loyalty instead of need, it could deepen mistrust. America and Europe offer a warning here too. Water infrastructure is always political. In the United States, water rights, river sharing irrigation districts, and drought restrictions can create major disputes between states, cities, farmers, and environmental groups. In Europe, rivers and water systems are managed through laws, agencies, treaties, and long-term regulation, because water does not respect political slogans. Burkina Faso would need its own version of that discipline. Not just a canal, a water constitution in practice, rules that communities understand, data that can be trusted, maintenance that is funded, and security that protects access instead of controlling it for a few. Because in the Sahel, water is not only a resource, it is a security question. And if the canal becomes the backbone of food and village survival, protecting it would become as important as building it. A giant canal can make dry land look alive, but water can also damage land when it is managed badly. That is the environmental risk behind every large irrigation dream. The Sahel does not only need more water, it needs water delivered with discipline. If irrigation is poorly planned, fields can become waterlogged. If drainage is weak, salt can rise through the soil and poison the land over time. If farmers receive water without training, they may over-irrigate crops, exhaust soils, or grow crops that demand more water than the system can support. If reservoirs are built without ecological planning, they can change local habitats, flood productive land, collect silt, and lose huge amounts of water to evaporation. And if stagnant water collects near communities, disease risks can rise. That is why greening the Sahel badly could create a different kind of disaster. A canal can bring life, but it can also bring mosquitoes, salinity conflict over land-broken drainage, and dependence on a water source that may not last. This is the part many inspirational videos ignore. They show the dry land turning green. They show water flowing through concrete channels. They show farmers smiling beside new fields. But they do not always show the maintenance crews, the soil scientists, the drainage engineers, the health workers, the water quality monitors, the people measuring how much water is being used where it is going, and what damage it may be creating underground. America learned this lesson the hard way in parts of its irrigated West. Water helped create enormous agricultural output, but it also produced disputes, groundwater depletion, river stress, and soil problems in some regions. Europe also learned that water systems must be managed constantly, especially as heat waves and droughts put pressure on rivers, canals, wetlands, and farmland. So Burkina Faso would need to treat a Sahel canal as a living system, not a one-time construction victory. That means drainage must be built with irrigation. Soil must be tested before crops expand. Water use must be measured. Reservoirs must be protected from silt. Farmers must be trained. Communities must be consulted before land is transformed. And environmental monitoring must continue after the cameras leave. Because the goal is not just to make the desert look green for a thumbnail. The goal is to make the land more resilient for decades. A successful canal would not be the one that creates the fastest green corridor. It would be the one that protects the soil, shares water fairly, limits waste, prevents disease, and still works after years of heat, dust, and dry seasons. That is the environmental test. Can Burkina Faso bring water into the Sahel without destroying the very land it is trying to save? The canal dream becomes clearer when we look at the countries that already tried to move water across dry land. The United States offers the most powerful mirror. In the American West, dams, reservoirs, aqueducts, pumping stations, and irrigation canals help cities rise and farms expand in places that would otherwise be far more limited by climate. Water made deserts productive. It fed orchards, cities, suburbs, cattle systems, and entire agricultural valleys. But the same system also created hard consequences. Rivers were divided. Groundwater was overused. Farmers, cities, states, and environmental groups fought over who had the right to use water when drought returned. The lesson is not that America failed. The lesson is that even a wealthy country with engineers, capital institutions, and decades of experience still struggles to manage water fairly and sustainably. Europe offers a different mirror. Europe has older canals, regulated rivers, water agencies, engineering traditions, and stronger maintenance systems in many regions. Canals helped move goods. Reservoirs helped stabilize supply. River management helped protect cities and farms. But Europe is also learning that climate pressure can expose weaknesses even in advanced systems. Droughts can lower rivers. Heat can stress agriculture. Aging infrastructure can become expensive to maintain. And water policy can become politically sensitive when households, industry, farming, and ecosystems all compete at the same time. So the message for Burkina Faso is not simple admiration. It is caution. Do not copy the richest countries only at the moment when their systems look impressive. Study them when their systems are under stress. Study what worked. Study what broke. Study who benefited. Study who paid the hidden costs. Because the Sahel cannot afford a canal that looks powerful for a few years and then becomes too expensive, too unequal, or too environmentally damaging to maintain. Burkina Faso would need a smarter model. Smaller reservoirs connected to larger corridors. Solar-powered pumping where it makes sense. Local water committees. Transparent data. Farmer training. Soil protection. Maintenance funds. Regional diplomacy. And a plan that grows in phases instead of betting everything on one giant symbol. That is the real mirror from America and Europe. The lesson is not build bigger. The lesson is manage smarter. Because in the end, the countries that win with water are not the ones that move the most of it. They are the ones that know how to protect it, share it, and keep it moving when the easy years are gone. Every giant canal dream eventually reaches the same courtroom. The reality test. Not the ceremony, not the first drone shot, not the ribbon cut beside flowing water. The real test begins after the cameras leave, when the dry season returns and the system has to work without applause. For Burkina Faso, 5 tests would decide whether a Sahel water corridor becomes transformation or an expensive illusion. The first is the water source test. Can enough water be found stored and moved without damaging rivers draining groundwater or depending on a source that weakens during drought? If the source is unclear, the canal should not grow faster than the water can support. The second is the energy test. Can pumps, gates, sensors, treatment systems, cold storage and processing zones receive reliable power every day? When electricity fails, water stops. And when water stops farms, factories and villages begin to feel it. The third is the maintenance test. Who removes silt? Who repairs cracked concrete? Who replaces pumps? Who guards solar equipment? Who pays for spare parts? A canal that cannot be maintained becomes a monument to the year it was announced. The fourth is the farmer test. Does water reach small farmers, women farmers, herders, and ordinary villages? Or does the best access go to large operators in powerful zones first? A canal that bypasses the people will not build food sovereignty. It will only create a new geography of inequality. The fifth is the environmental test. Can the system prevent salinity, waterlogging, disease risk, soil exhaustion, and land speculation? Can it protect the land while trying to make the land productive? These tests are not negative thinking. They are what serious countries do before turning dreams into national infrastructure. That is the real national test behind the blue line itself. Because a canal is not proven when water first arrives. It is proven after 5 dry seasons. When farmers still plant. When pumps still run. When soil still holds. When villages still trust the rules. And when the system still works without needing another speech to keep the dream alive. So what would this canal really mean? Not just water, not just concrete, not just a blue line crossing dry land. It would mean Burkina Faso asking whether a country under pressure can turn climate risk into national capacity. If the idea fails, it becomes another expensive dream, a symbol too large for the water, energy, maintenance politics, and environment behind it. But if the system is built carefully in phases with local reservoirs, solar power, fair water rules, farmer training, soil protection, and real maintenance, it could change more than farms. It could change villages. It could change food prices. It could change rural jobs. It could change migration pressure. It could change how the Sahel sees its own future. That is why the real question is not whether Traore can draw a giant canal on a map. The real question is whether Burkina Faso can build the system that makes water useful, fair, and lasting. Would you support a giant Sahel water canal? Or should Burkina Faso focus first on smaller dams, wells, solar pumps, and local irrigation? Comment your country below today and subscribe for more documentary breakdowns on Africa's development, sovereignty, and future in real time. Disclaimer, this video is fictional storytelling created for education, commentary, and entertainment. It is not a factual report or official information. Any similarities to real events are coincidental. Please enjoy it as creative content only.